Alright. Moving on to season 4 of this show. And, it was a nice season. Definitely easier to watch than season 3, let me tell you, but I'm starting to think that the show is kind of running out of things to throw at me. Oh, it's still good, let me tell you, and I'll take this season over season 3 because I was laughing a little bit more, and after the bad first impression, with Lo, as she actually brought a decent amount to the table here, and I'm anxious to see where that's going to go. And then a couple of other nice things that this season did, like bringing in a character or two that I think is from the Superman lore, because that character who was out to create bad luck, where they discover his true name by, I'm spelling it backwards based on what he said. I recognize that character from the comics, although the way they portray him here is nothing like the comics, but that's actually a good thing in this situation. And then I'm guessing we're getting the Fortress of Solitude at the end of this season, which is nice. And then Lionel, continuing his corruption. And then Lex walking, that very fine line between following his father but trying to distance himself. It's interesting, even though it is a little bit repetitive by this point. Yeah, and I'm amazed that Lionel is still kicking around. I thought for sure that they would have gotten rid of him by now. It's crazy. And then jor-el, again, they're getting a little bit repetitive with him, but he still carries that nervous feel that, he's constantly throwing problems in there with Clark, yeah. And I can't remember if it was said this season or in the first couple episodes of the 5th season, because I'm a few episodes into that, but now I'm really beginning to think that this show is the exception to a lot of the other Superman stuff that I've seen, because if you've watched Kill Bill, the character Bill makes a point towards the end of the second movie that when it comes to superheroes, Superman is pretty much the exception, to where his Superman identity is actually who he really is, whereas Clark Kent is the secret identity. Here, even though obviously, he doesn't have the tights and the cape, you really get the idea that Clark is his real identity, and that the superpowers are something that he just happens to have, like a lot of the other superheroes, even though, if you actually read quite a few issues into Thor, you realize that Thor is his real identity. Right. So I just want to point that out. So let's talk about Lois here, because I think that she deserves some discussion. Well, her first impression, was kind of bad, even though I have to admit, if I recall watching the 1978 movie, I don't think Margot Kidder gave the greatest impression, but it was a little different here, because I'd wager that the little bit that Margot Kidder did was closer to her own personality, whereas Lois here, you genuinely get the idea that this character is a little sassy, probably won't get along with most people, but then, as the season went along, I began to enjoy it, and that's a bit of where she made it seem like the shit clock. I took the shower. That was hilarious. That's the hardest I've ever laughed while watching this show. And then, of course, once we see her sister, because I totally forgot that she had a sister, you realize she's not so bad, ironically. And then that comment that Lana made, the idea that the good couples always start out, as not liking each other, and then she hints at the opposites attract kind of thing. Well, she kind of does have a point, because most of the big fanfiction pairings that I do have the opposites attract kind of thing going, or at least an element or two of it, I freely admit. But I don't know if that really holds up in real life, because in real life, the general consensus that I've kind of come up with seems to indicate that when people claim opposites attract happened, they actually had more in common than they first realized, so... But, yeah, I totally think that since they introduced Lois and kept her around in a recurring fashion, that, she'll probably become Clark's love interest eventually, because, with, Lana, he keeps trying to be with her, and circumstances force them apart. And also, we're seeing the total build-up of Clark and Lois's relationship here, whereas Lana was sort of thrust into the picture, and let's be realistic, Lois is Superman's main love interest and has been in every single movie, including the ones before the 1978 movie, whereas Lana has been in exactly one movie, and that was because Lois wasn't in that one. Hmm? You could just tell that they're setting that up to happen, you know, because Superman is one uh, situation where he definitely has a main love interest, and if you introduce that love interest, you're not going to be able to do anything with that. It's not like Spider-Man, where even though he was originally going for Gwen rather than Mary Jane, if you have both of them, you've actually got a little bit of leeway in there, even though I do think that there's a slightly bigger group for Mary Jane. Silly. Anyway, yeah, touching upon Jensen Ackles real fast, yeah, I like him as an actor, and he brought a decent amount of additional layers to this show, even though I can't help but feel like the witch curse with Lana was kind of shoved in there. Now, granted, it's a story arc that doesn't involve Clark at first, which I've stated before is a good pro of this show, but I don't know, it just felt kind of overkill, just like having that sort of being the reason why Jason started talking to her, even though his mother kind of forced him into it, and then suddenly, at the end of the season, he's okay with his mother kind of forcing him around. I don't know about that, but they were trying to phase him out at the end of the season, although I was really interested to learn that Jensen was actually in the top 2 to be considered for the role of Clark, but they ended up not choosing him. Well, it's a good thing that they didn't, because Jensen works better as Dean anyway, so yeah. And also, finally having Chloe figure out that Clark, has no superpowers. I'm glad that they finally did that, because I was starting to think, well, how can you keep this character around, especially if you're highlighting Chloe, to have aspirations to be at the Daily Planet when Clark and Lois are supposed to end up there. So, establishing that firmer connection to Clark gives them reason to keep her around. Because, like with Lionel, I had begun to think, aren't they going to kill her off at some point? Although I haven't been thinking that nearly as much as Lionel. And then bringing back a couple of other characters from previous seasons, especially the teleportation chick whose name I'm stupidly blanking on right now. Like, that was actually kind of touching, even though at the same time it was like, really? You're doing that again? Yeah, shepherding him off to Vegas and just... I mean, like, okay, granted, I know that people do kind of do that, but it should be a little tougher, don't you think? Madness, yeah, but... yeah. As I said, the show has all the good stuff from the previous ones, and was much easier to watch this time around. And I want to touch upon one more thing before I end this. Actually, no, 2 things, because here's one thing about Jor-el that gets to me. So at the end of last season, obviously we had the introduction of Kara, who in Superman lore is actually his cousin, and it turns out to be Supergirl. Well, what happened to her? She teleports him to some random dimensional place, and then all of a sudden he's, put back, and then Jor-el doesn't really even mention it by the end of the season. It's like, what happened to that? Like, what? Huh? You don't introduce a character like that and then just write it off. That's a huge slap in the face. And it's not so much because, the character got shafted. It's because it doesn't feel complete. It just felt totally random. Like, why did it have to be her? You could have just introduced, I don't know, some other random Kryptonian and made the name up. Or had Jor-el say, I actually took over her body, which that actually kind of think of it, that might be what they were going for. Maybe. Somebody might explain that to me. Thank you. And the truly last thing that I want to mention in this review is that you might be noticing that I don't appear to be mentioning every major thing that goes on in these seasons. Well, this is a case where there's too many things for me to honestly mention, so I'm touching upon all the main stuff that I remember, and then I'm hoping that you can fill in the dots about it, because like if you want me to talk about something a little bit more detail in the comments, by all means, ask me questions, and I'll type it out, but you gotta remember, I came into this show totally cold, knowing nothing about it, so, yeah. Alright, third time was the charm for this review. See you next time.